I've not seen the corporate media cover this story much. It's about my home island of Puerto Rico, and I'm not sure if anybody's really been following this because it's not been covered that much at all anywhere really. But that the island is privatizing their energy grid, or at the very least, they're privatizing the energy grid, and they're also expecting this company to send electricity to 1.5 million homes around the island of Puerto Rico. Now let's see how this turns out. You'll be shocked to find out it's not going to turn out really well. I'm going to read some of the article. A phalanx of armed deputies wearing bulletproof vests descended on the corporate offices of the company hired to fix Puerto Rico's antiquated power grid. Now, the CEO, by the way, there was a warrant out for his arrest because he refused to give information to the oversight officials that were handling the situation. They were looking for Luma Energy Chief Executive Wayne Stansberry, I think I butchered his name, but whatever, who had been labeled a fugitive by local lawmakers for refusing demands to turn over documents related to the company. The deputies didn't find Stansberry, and the warrant that had been issued for his arrest was suspended after he handed over a memory drive with thousands of documents that leaders of the territory's House of Representatives were reviewing as part of the probe into Luma's use of public money. Yes, so the CEO nearly got his ass arrested because he refused to hand over information to the House Representatives in Puerto Rico. Of course not. There's a big shock there, huh? And these private companies aren't really interested in having oversight, having the government, making sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing with the money that they got. And let's see here. This is about the island. Hiring a Luma last year marked a new beginning for the island. A 16-year, $1.5 billion experiment with privatization. Excuse me, couldn't spit it out properly. Luma, a venture company created by two energy companies, Alberta, Canada-based ATCO and Houston-based Quantica Services, were contracted to distribute electricity to 1.5 million customers, as of what I was saying at the beginning of the video, and make badly needed upgrades to the power grid. Yeah, great. Why doesn't the government do that? Why doesn't the federal government allocate money to Puerto Rico and handle upgrading the power grid, just like they should be doing here in the U.S. and the mainland? Nope, private corporation has to do it. Anyway, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, has allocated nearly $10 billion in taxpayer funds to the effort. So, the FEMA has given $10 billion to this effort already to this private company. Why can't FEMA handle this? I mean, don't they have engineers and electricians and people that can handle this? Why not? Why give it to some private corporation looking to make a buck off Puerto Rico? The Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority, also known as PREPA, the state-run utility provider, now only manages the generation of electricity. So basically, their job is now totally to make the electricity, not to distribute it to customers. So that's the private-public partnership. That's the public part. But in 5 months, it has been in charge. Problems have worsened. Who could have seen that coming? I saw that coming as soon as I heard about this deal. I was like, yeah, this is going to be a disaster. By many measures, including numerous sustained power outages and rate increases that have infuriated customers and lawmakers. I have an anecdote about that. I went to Puerto Rico in 2017, before Maria, like 6 months before Maria in February, to see family. I was there 10 days. One of those days, which I remember was a Thursday, because it caught me off guard. The power went out for no apparent reason, and this used to happen even in those days, even before Maria. This is a regular occurrence. Power went out from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Exactly. I remember that specifically. I was like, oh my god, this is a disaster. I just basically, I couldn't do anything. It was so boring. I mean, I was so bored. It's like, oh fuck, like it makes me appreciate the fact that we have electricity and no power issues here in America, or at least in New Jersey where I live. But yeah, that's I know that this is true because I have experience with this. In his first extensive interview since the events of last week, Stensberry says his focus has been on LUMA and more than 3,200 employees and their mission to improve the power grid. He blamed decades of underinvestment and neglect for the problems. So you're blaming the government, but you were hired to fix those problems. You got $1.5 billion. To be fair, it's allocated over 16 years, but still, you got that's a lot of money. And Puerto Rico isn't a big island, so that should be plenty of money for you to fix the power grid, so these power outages are not an issue anymore. Now, let me get to the, that doesn't matter much. Yeah, that's not what I'm looking for. Here we go. This is what's interesting. Puerto Rico's woes are compounded by the fact that its budget is managed by an oversight panel created by Congress in 2016 to rescue the island from a financial crisis created when its government was unable to pay more than $70 billion in debt. PREPA, which is the Puerto Rican Energy... What was it again? Why did I lose... The Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority, sorry about that, PREPA, I'm just going to call it, accounts for $9 billion of that debt. So the question is, by the way, the oversight committee, the oversight panel was what was called the Promesa Act, which President Obama signed into law in 2016, which basically oversaw the privatization of Puerto Rico. That's basically what that was. But the real question is, why was Puerto Rico in $70 billion in debt for such a small island? There's a few reasons. Now, if we look here, I usually don't like using Wikipedia as a source, but a lot of these articles are from the New York Times and the Washington Post, and I can't access them without paying, and I'm not going to pay these assholes money. So, Wikipedia is going to have to do for now. But the $70 billion in debt comes mostly from, let me read, federal subsidies. Because for many years, Puerto Rico had favorable tax status. This is why Puerto Rico was booming and there's a lot of jobs and stuff, because a lot of these corporations were headquartered in Puerto Rico. For much of the 20th century, Puerto Rico was subject to favorable tax laws from the U.S. federal government, which essentially acted to subsidize the island's economy. In 1996, U.S. President Bill Clinton, of course, signed legislation phasing out important parts of the favorable federal tax code over 10 years ending in 2006. That's around the time where a lot of these companies left Puerto Rico, 2006. And we're reading about that, and all of a sudden Puerto Rico was in an economic downturn. The end of the subsidies led to companies fleeing the island, which itself I don't know why I can't spit that out, led to tax shortfalls. At first, Puerto Rican government tried to make up for the shortfall by issuing bonds. This is where the issue comes in. The government was able to issue an unusually large number of bonds due to dubious underwritings from financial institutions, here we go, such as Santander Bank, UBS, Barclays, Morgan Stanley, and Citigroup. Eventually, the debt burden became so great the island was unable to pay interest on the bonds that it issued. Of course, big banks, Wall Street, fucked over Puerto Rico. And it seems to me I hate to be conspiratorial, but it seems to be a plan. It seemed to be planned. When former President Clinton signed the legislation phasing out the important parts of the tax code, which led to these corporations leaving Puerto Rico, that led to the Puerto Rican government issuing more and more bonds to get funding for the government. And on top of that, that's when these big banks starting underwriting these bonds. So what does that tell you? That tells you then they knew this debt was coming, and they knew the Puerto Rican government could not pay for this. So that's when the Promesa Act comes in 2016. No, I'm not drunk. I can't spit anything out right now. And that's when they're demanding privatization. I mean, that's when you see this new private-public partnership with the energy companies, with that energy company and with the grid, which is not working as I discussed earlier. Now, I wanted to talk, and there's a number of reasons for that. Also, when you look at Medicaid, the United States government has screwed over Puerto Rico so much. It's not just with the power grid. It's not just with the Promesa Act. It goes so much deeper. It starts back in the beginning of the 20th century, really, with World War I. I can get into that, and I'm going to definitely get into that in a future video, explaining the history of how the United States has screwed over Puerto Rico. Yeah, I think that's very important to understand what's going on in the island today. But I'm just going to end up talking about the Medicaid funding, because this is very important. More than 60% of Puerto Rico's population receives Medicare and Medicaid, with about 40% enrolled in Mi Salud, the Puerto Rican Medicaid program. Mi Salud translates to My Health, which is the name of the Medicaid program in Puerto Rico. Here in New Jersey, the Medicaid program is called New Jersey Family Care. So each state has a different name for their Medicaid program. There's a significant disparity in federal funding for these programs compared to the 50 states, a situation that Congress started in 1968 when it placed a cap on Medicaid funding for U.S. territories, which is this law, 1968, the federal funding cap for Medicaid in Puerto Rico. And that's really for all U.S. territories, so Puerto Rico is really the main one. And that led to a situation where Puerto Rico might typically receive $373 million a year in federal funding. But Mississippi, a state with a similar population to that of Puerto Rico, receives $3.6 billion. See, this is the thing. Puerto Rico does not have representation in Congress because they're not a state. They're a territory, commonwealth, or honestly, they're a colony. That's what they are. It's basically a colony. So they have no representation in Congress. Nobody in the House, nobody in the Senate. So this is why Puerto Ricans are basically at the mercy of Washington. And Washington will do whatever it takes to fuck them over. Because they don't give a shit about them, because they're not a state. They don't actually vote for president. They don't vote for senators, or they don't vote for Congress people. And so ultimately, Congress people that have no power. To be fair, the U.S. territories or colonies, they elect a representative at large, which is basically he or she, an individual that can introduce legislation, but has no authority to vote on legislation or debate legislation. So they're really just there just to say, oh, you see, we have a representative from the territories, from the colonies, but we actually don't listen to them, or we don't listen to a goddamn thing they say, we don't care what they say. So that's that leads to Puerto Rico being fucked every single time. And there's so many more examples, but that's just the main example. These are just a few points. I can go on and on about this, but then the video will be 2 hours long, and I'll get tired, and that's not good. So I can make future videos on this, talking about this, and the history of the United States and Puerto Rico. Those videos will be coming in a matter of time. I had to research them first, make sure I got all my information correct on the history. One more thing before I end this video. Where's AOC? Where's our Puerto Rican hero in Congress? I mean, she's claimed she recently went back to right after Maria. She went to the island talking about how she's gonna help and she's gonna do this, and Trump's not doing enough, and blah 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 blah. Where is she since then? How come she hasn't said anything about this public-private partnership, which is disastrous? How come she didn't say anything about the Promesa Act and how everything's being privatized? How come nothing? There's not a single goddamn thing coming from this woman. She's one of the most useless politicians in the country. Period. And I'm so sick and tired of her and her failures, and the failures of the Justice Democrats in general, and the squad. Fuck them. I'm tired of them. Well, that's all I have for you guys today. I appreciate you watching my video, checking out the channel, subscribing. Make sure you subscribe to this channel, share the content because there's more coming, and I'll see you guys next time.